Engineer Jinho floated inside the maintenance pod, his tools drifting around him in zero gravity. Another routine day fixing communication relays in the empty space between star systems. He had been doing this job for 3 years now, and honestly, it was getting boring. The same broken circuits, the same error codes, the same endless darkness outside his small ship. But today felt different. His scanner started beeping in a weird pattern. Jinho frowned and checked the display. The energy readings were all wrong. Instead of the normal background radiation he expected in this dead system, something was generating massive amounts of power down on the planet below. That's strange, he muttered to himself, adjusting his headset. There's supposed to be nothing here. The planet looked like a big grey rock from space. No atmosphere worth mentioning, no signs of life, no reason for anyone to be there. Yet, his instruments were going crazy, detecting energy levels that could power a small city. Jinho's hands moved across the control panel, running deeper scans. The power source was definitely artificial. Someone had built something big down there, and they were trying very hard to hide it. The energy signature was buried deep underground, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. His curiosity got the better of him. Company policy said to report unusual findings and wait for instructions, but Jinho had always been the type to figure things out himself. Plus, his supervisor was probably asleep anyway, and it would take hours to get approval for an investigation. Just a quick look, he told himself, firing up the ship's engines. The descent through the thin atmosphere was smooth. Jinho's ship was small but well-equipped for surface operations. As he got closer to the source of the energy readings, his scanners picked up more details. There were structures down there, definitely not natural, and they were actively drawing power from somewhere deep underground. He landed his ship behind a cluster of rocky hills about 2 kilometers from the energy source. The suit's systems kicked in automatically as he prepared for EVA. The planet's surface was cold and airless, but his equipment could handle it easily. Walking across the barren landscape, Jinho noticed something odd. The ground here wasn't natural rock. Someone had covered up massive construction work with fake surface material. His boots crunched on artificial gravel designed to look like the real thing. The energy readings were getting stronger with every step. Whatever was down there was running at full capacity, consuming enormous amounts of power. But power from what? There were no fusion reactors in his scans, no solar collectors, no obvious energy source. That's when he found the entrance. Hidden beneath a camouflaged hatch, a tunnel led straight down into the planet's crust. The walls were lined with some kind of alien metal that hummed with electrical current. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as Jinho descended deeper into the facility. The air grew warmer as he went down. His suit detected traces of oxygen, mixed with other gases he didn't recognize. Someone was definitely living down here, and they weren't human. The construction was all wrong for human engineering, with odd angles and surfaces that seemed to bend light in strange ways. After walking for what felt like hours through winding corridors, Jinho finally heard voices echoing from somewhere ahead. Multiple species, speaking in languages his translator couldn't identify. But underneath their conversation, he heard something else that made his blood run cold. Screaming. Weak, desperate screaming that sounded almost human, but not quite. Jinho knew he should turn back, report what he'd found and let the authorities handle it. But those screams meant someone was in trouble, and he couldn't just walk away. He pressed forward into the unknown, not knowing he was about to discover something that would change everything. Jinho crept through the metal corridors, following the sound of those terrible screams. The walls around him pulsed with energy, and strange symbols glowed in patterns he couldn't understand. His heart was beating so fast he could hear it inside his helmet. As he turned a corner, the corridor opened into a massive underground chamber. What Jinho saw there made him stop breathing for a moment. Dozens of strange creatures were chained to glowing machines. They looked almost human, but taller and thinner, with skin that seemed to shimmer with its own light. Even in their weakened state, Jinho could see they were once beautiful beings. Now they hung limp in metal restraints, barely conscious. The machines they were connected to were definitely not human technology. Thick cables ran from the creatures' bodies into massive power collectors that hummed with electricity. Jinho realized with horror that these beings were being used as living batteries. Their life energy was being drained to power the entire facility. Walking between the prisoners were tall reptilian aliens that Jinho had never seen before. They had gray-green skin, sharp teeth, and cold yellow eyes that showed no emotion. These had to be the Vorthak his scanner had detected earlier. They moved between their captives with casual cruelty, adjusting the machines and checking power levels like they were tending to livestock. One of the Vorthak guards was particularly brutal. He carried a shock stick and seemed to enjoy using it on prisoners who looked too weak to produce enough energy. Every time he zapped one of the glowing creatures, the power readings on nearby machines would spike briefly before dropping again. But it was one prisoner in particular that caught Jinho's attention. Near the center of the chamber, a young female was connected to the largest energy extraction machine. She couldn't have been much older than a teenager in human years. Her natural glow was so dim, it was almost gone completely. The cables attached to her body were thicker than the others, and the machine she was connected to was working overtime to drain what little life force she had left. Her name, Jinho, would later learn was Nari. She hung there with her eyes closed, breathing so slowly that Jinho thought she might already be dead. But then she opened her eyes for just a moment, and he saw something that broke his heart. Despite everything they had done to her, despite being tortured and drained for who knows how long, there was still a spark of hope in those eyes. The Vorthak, guard with the shock stick, noticed Nari's slight movement and walked over to her machine. He checked the power output readings and frowned. Her energy levels were dropping too fast. At this rate, she wouldn't last another day. "Increase the extraction rate," the guard growled to another Vorthak operator. "The commander wants maximum power before we move to the next planet." "But sir, if we push her any harder, she'll die within hours," the operator replied nervously. "Then we'll use her completely and find another one. These Lumina are everywhere in this sector." Jinho felt sick to his stomach. These weren't just prisoners or slaves. They were being used up like disposable resources, their very lives converted into electrical power for whatever sick purpose the Vorthak had in mind. He counted at least 40 of these Lumina beings in various stages of energy depletion. Some looked like they had been here for months, their once bright skin now grey and lifeless. Others seemed newer, still fighting against their restraints with what little strength they had left. The whole operation was massive, clearly designed to process hundreds of these creatures. This wasn't just a single crime, but an industrial-scale genocide powered by the victims themselves. Jinho knew he had to do something, but what could one human engineer do against an entire alien military operation? Jinho was so focused on the horrible scene in front of him that he didn't hear the footsteps behind him. A powerful hand grabbed his shoulder and spun him around. Before he could react, 3 Vorthak guards surrounded him, their yellow eyes glowing with anger. "Human spy," one of them hissed, pointing a strange weapon at Jinho's chest. "You shouldn't have come here." Jinho tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The guards were faster and stronger than him. Within seconds, they had stripped away his communication equipment and dragged him deeper into the facility. His calls for help echoed uselessly in the metal corridors. They threw him into a dark cell carved out of solid rock. The door slammed shut with a sound that told Jinho he wasn't getting out any time soon. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he realized he wasn't alone. "Welcome to hell," said a voice in the darkness. A man stepped forward from the shadows. He was human, probably in his 30s, with dark hair and tired eyes. His clothes were torn and dirty, and he looked like he hadn't eaten a proper meal in weeks. "I'm Do-hyun," the man said, extending his hand. "Been here about 2 months now. You're the first human I've seen since they caught me." "Jinho," he replied, shaking Do-hyun's hand. "What is this place? What do they want with us?" Do-hyun laughed bitterly. "They want us to work, mine rare metals, maintain their equipment, basically be their unpaid labor force. But that's not the worst part." He pointed toward the cell bars. "The worst part is what they're doing to those poor creatures out there." Through the bars, Jinho could see into the main chamber where the Lumina were still connected to their terrible machines. Even from this distance, he could hear the low hum of energy being extracted from their bodies. "They're called Lumina," Do-hyun explained. Peaceful species from a planet about 50 light-years from here. The Vorthak invaded their world 3 years ago, enslaved the survivors, and now they're using them as living power sources for their entire operation. That's impossible, Jinho whispered. Living beings can't generate that much energy. The Lumina can. It's natural for them, like how humans produce body heat. But the Vorthak figured out how to extract it forcibly, even if it kills them in the process. As they talked, Jinho noticed movement in the cell across from theirs. A weak glow came from the darkness, and he realized one of the Lumina was imprisoned there too. She was sitting against the wall, barely conscious, but still alive. That's Nari, Dohyun said softly. She's just a kid by their standards, been fighting this whole thing longer than anyone else here. Nari slowly opened her eyes and looked at Jinho. Up close, he could see she was probably equivalent to a human teenager. Her skin had a natural luminescence that flickered like a dying light bulb. Despite her weakness, she managed to speak in broken English. "New human," she whispered. "Why you come this place?" "I was just fixing equipment nearby," Jinho replied. "I detected energy readings and came to investigate." Nari nodded slowly. "My people, we never hurt anyone. We live quiet. On our world, grow food, make art, study stars. Then Vorthak come with ships and weapons. Take us from families." Her voice was getting weaker, but she continued. "They say we special because we make energy. But they no understand. Energy come from happiness, from being with loved ones. When they take that away, energy becomes pain." Dohyun moved closer to the bars. "She's been teaching me about her people. The Lumina were explorers and artists. They never developed weapons because they never needed them. Their whole civilization was built on cooperation and sharing knowledge." "How many of them are left?" Jinho asked. "Not many," Nari replied sadly. "Vorthik take thousands from our world. Most die in these machines. I see friends become empty shells before Vorthik throw them away." The reality of the situation hit Jinho like a punch to the stomach. This wasn't just slavery or forced labor. This was systematic extermination of an entire species, one life at a time. "There has to be something we can do," Jinho said. Dohyun shook his head. "I've been trying to figure that out for 2 months. There are too many guards, too many weapons, and we're too deep underground for anyone to find us." But Nari looked at Jinho with those tired eyes, and he saw something that surprised him. "Hope. Maybe," she whispered. 3 minds better than 2. Over the next few days, Jinho found himself drawn into conversations with Nari whenever the guards weren't watching. Despite being barely alive, she had a sharp mind and seemed eager to share knowledge about her people. Dohyun often joined their whispered discussions, serving as a translator when Nari's English failed her. "Your people's energy?" Jinho asked. Quietly one evening. "How does it actually work?" Nari's dim glow flickered as she tried to explain. "Not like your human electricity. Our energy comes from inside, from our emotions and connections to others. Happy Lumina make more energy than sad ones." She placed her thin hand against the cell bars, and Jinho could see tiny sparks dancing between her fingers. Even in her weakened state, the power was still there. "When we touch each other, energy flows between us, makes us stronger together. But these machines," she gestured toward the extraction equipment, "they take energy by force, rips it from our bodies like tearing out pieces of our souls." Jinho leaned closer, his engineering mind starting to work. "So the energy is connected to your nervous system? Your brain patterns?" "Yes, but more than that, connected to our hearts, our feelings, our memories of home." Nari's voice grew sad. "Vorthak machines only take. They never give back. That's why we get weaker and weaker." Dohyun had been listening quietly. "I've watched those machines operate during my work shifts. The energy flows in only one direction, always outward from the Lumina into their power cores." "That's not how energy should work," Jinho muttered, thinking out loud. "In any proper electrical system, you need balance, input and output, positive and negative charges." He started pacing in their small cell, his mind racing with possibilities. "Nari, what happens when your people share energy naturally? Does it flow both ways?" "Of course," she replied, looking puzzled by the obvious question. "Energy is like conversation. One person speaks, another listens, then they switch, always giving and receiving. But these machines are only taking, Jinho said, excitement building in his voice. They're creating an imbalance in the entire system. Do-hyun caught on quickly. You're thinking like an engineer. What goes up must come down, what goes out must come back in. Exactly. Jinho knelt down next to Nari's cell. What if we could reverse the flow? Instead of the machines draining your energy, what if we made them feed energy back to you? Nari's eyes widened, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked truly hopeful. You think this possible? I don't know yet, but I've been studying those machines during my work details. They're sophisticated, but they're not magic. They work on principles, I understand. Jinho's voice grew more confident. The Vorthak built them to be one-way systems because they never expected resistance, but every circuit can be reversed if you know how. Over the following days, Jinho paid careful attention during his forced labor shifts. The Vorthak made human prisoners maintain the simpler equipment while they handled the more complex energy extraction systems themselves. But Jinho was good at his job, and he started noticing things the guards missed. The power conduits were standard electromagnetic channels, just more advanced than human technology. The control systems used basic logic circuits that responded to electrical signals. Most importantly, the safety systems were designed to shut down if power levels got too high, not if they reversed direction. The weak point is the central distribution hub, he explained to Nari and Do-hyun one night. All the energy from every lumina gets channeled through one main processor before it goes to their power storage units. What does that mean for us? Do-hyun asked. It means if we can get to that hub and reverse the polarity on the main circuits, all that stored energy would flow backward through the system. Instead of draining the lumina, it would feed power back into them. Nari listened carefully, then asked the important question. But what happened to machines when energy flows wrong way? Jinho smiled grimly. They overload and burn out. The whole system would destroy itself. And the Vorthak? Their weapons, their equipment, their ship systems all run on power from this facility. If we overload their entire energy grid, they'll be left with nothing but backup batteries. For the first time in months, Do-hyun actually looked hopeful. It could work, but how do we get to the central hub? It's in the most heavily guarded section of the facility. Nari's weak glow grew slightly brighter as she considered the problem. Other lumina still have some strength left. If they knew there was hope, if they could help somehow. We'd need a distraction, Jinho realized. Something big enough to draw the guards away from the control center. The three of them fell silent, each lost in thought. They had the beginning of a plan, but executing it would require perfect timing, incredible luck, and probably cost some of them their lives. But looking at Nari's determined face, Jinho knew they had to try. Jinho knew that. Talking about a plan was one thing, but actually building something that could work was completely different. He needed parts, tools, and most importantly, he needed to do it all without the Vorthak guards noticing. His opportunity came during the daily work shifts. The guards assigned him to repair damaged mining equipment in a storage area filled with broken machinery. While pretending to fix their tools, Jinho started collecting small components that the Vorthak wouldn't miss. A few wire connectors here, some circuit boards there, and gradually he built up a small collection of useful parts. The hardest part was hiding everything. During his lunch breaks, Jinho would slip tiny components into his food containers or tape them under his work table. Do-hyun helped by creating distractions whenever a guard got too curious about what Jinho was doing. You're taking a huge risk, Do-hyun whispered one evening as they sat in their cell. If they catch you with those parts... I know, Jinho replied, carefully examining a small power regulator he'd salvaged that day. But we can't just sit here and watch them kill everyone slowly. In the cell across from them, Nari had been getting weaker each day. The Vorthak were pushing her harder than the other lumina, trying to extract every bit of energy they could before she died. But she still tried to help Jinho understand how the energy systems worked. The connection between lumina is not just electrical, she explained, in a voice barely above a whisper. We share thoughts, feelings, memories. When one of us suffers, we all feel it. This gave Jinho an idea. What if we could use that connection to coordinate an escape, if all the lumina worked together at the same time? Nari's eyes lit up with the first real hope he'd seen from her. Yes, but we need to tell others. They must know there is chance. The next day, Jinho met another Lumina prisoner named Minji. She was older than Nari, maybe equivalent to a human, adult, and had been captured from a different part of their homeworld. Unlike Nari, who had learned some English from Dohyun, Minji could barely communicate with the humans. But Nari served as a translator, and slowly Jinho began to share his plan with more of the prisoners. Each conversation had to be careful and quiet, always watching for guards who might overhear. Human thinks he can reverse the machines, Nari explained to Minji in their own language. Make energy flow back to us instead of away. Minji looked skeptical at first. She had been a prisoner longer than most and had seen too many failed escape attempts. But when Jinho showed her the small device he was building, her attitude changed. The device wasn't much to look at, just a collection of salvaged parts connected with improvised wiring, but Jinho explained how it could create an electrical feedback loop that would overload the Vorthak's power systems. It's like a key that unlocks all the stored energy at once, he told them through Nari's translation. Instead of the machines taking your power, all that energy comes rushing back to you. Word spread quietly among the Lumina prisoners. They began to look at Jinho differently, not just as another captive, but as someone who might actually be able to help them. Even the weakest ones started to show small signs of hope. Minji proved to be especially valuable. She had been an engineer on her homeworld and understood technology better than most Lumina. She helped Jinho refine his device, suggesting ways to make it more compatible with their natural energy patterns. Your human electricity is different from ours, she explained through Nari. But if you adjust the frequency here, she pointed to part of the device, it will match our bioenergy better. Working together in secret, they improved the design over several days. The device grew more sophisticated, incorporating both human engineering and Lumina energy knowledge. But they all knew it was still just theory, until they could test it. The real breakthrough came when an old Lumina named Sung joined their group. He had been a scientist before his capture, and understood the energy extraction machines better than anyone else. The central hub has a vulnerability, he whispered to them one night. Every few hours it cycles power to prevent overheating. During that cycle there's a brief window where the safety systems reset. How long? Jinho asked. Maybe 30 seconds, but that might be enough time to connect your device and start the reversal process. Jinho felt his heart racing. They actually had a real chance now. The plan was dangerous and would require perfect timing, but it could work. Looking around at the faces of his fellow prisoners, both human and Lumina, Jinho saw something that hadn't been there before. They believed in him, and more importantly, they believed in themselves again. The hardest part would be getting to the central hub without being caught. Things started going wrong on a Tuesday morning. Jinho was working on a broken mining drill when he noticed Overseer Keth watching him more closely than usual. The Vorthak guard had always been cruel, but now there was something different in his cold yellow eyes. Suspicion. Keth walked over slowly, his heavy boots echoing in the storage room. "Human engineer," he said in his harsh voice, "you have been very busy lately." Jinho kept working on the drill, trying to act normal. "Just fixing your equipment like you ordered, sir." "Yes, but you fix things very slowly now. Take much longer." Than before. Keth picked up one of Jinho's tools and examined it carefully. "And you ask many questions about our power systems." Jinho's heart started beating faster, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I need to understand how everything connects. Together to do proper repairs." Keth wasn't buying it. He grabbed Jinho's toolkit and dumped everything onto the floor. Hidden among the legitimate repair tools were several small components that Jinho had been collecting for his device. "What are these for?" Keth demanded, holding up a circuit board that clearly didn't belong with standard mining equipment. "Spare parts," Jinho said quickly. "Sometimes the old components fail and I need replacements." But Keth was smarter than Jinho had hoped. The Vorthak overseer had been running prison operations for years and knew when prisoners were planning something. He signaled to two guards who immediately grabbed Jinho's arms. "Search his cell," Keth ordered. "Search all the human cells and check the Lumina prisoners too. If they're planning something, I want to know about it." Within an hour, the guards had found Jinho's hidden device components. They also discovered some of the communication materials that Nari had been using to coordinate with other Lumina prisoners. The evidence was damning. Keth dragged Jinho down to the main chamber where all the Lumina were connected to their energy extraction machines. Nari was there, weaker than ever, barely conscious as her life force was slowly drained away. "You thought you were clever," Keth snarled, throwing Jinho to the ground in front of Nari's machine. "Building little toys, making secret plans with the prisoners." Jinho looked up at Nari, who opened her eyes just enough to see what was happening. Even in her weakened state, he could see the fear in her expression. "Here's what happens to clever prisoners," Keith continued, pulling out a weapon. That looked like a cross between a gun and a cattle prod. "I kill their friends slowly in front of them." He pointed the weapon directly at Nari's chest. "This little Lumina has been causing trouble since the day we captured her. Always trying to encourage the others, always refusing to give up hope. But hope is dangerous in a place like this." "Wait," Jinho said desperately. "She hasn't done anything wrong. If you want to punish someone, punish me." Keth laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Oh, I will punish you. I'll make you watch as I drain every bit of life from her body. Then I'll do the same to your human friend and every other prisoner. Who helped you?" The threat wasn't empty. Jinho could see that Keth was serious. The Overseer had probably killed dozens of prisoners before, and he would do it again without hesitation. "You have one day to tell me exactly what you were planning," Keth said. "If you cooperate, maybe I'll let some of the others live. If you don't, I start with the young Lumina and work my way through every prisoner in this facility." As the guards dragged Jinho back to his cell, his mind was racing. The plan they had been working on for weeks was nowhere near ready. His device was still incomplete. They hadn't figured out how to get to the central hub, and half the Lumina prisoners were too weak to help with any kind of coordinated effort. But Keth's threat changed everything. They couldn't wait for the perfect moment anymore. They had to act now, even if it meant almost certain failure. Do-hyun was waiting in the cell when the guards threw Jinho inside. "I heard what happened," he said grimly. "Keth's serious about this. He's killed prisoners before for much less." "No," Jinho replied, his hands shaking as he thought about Nari connected to that terrible machine. "We have to move tonight. The device isn't ready. The plan isn't complete, but we're out of time." "Tonight? That's suicide. We don't have enough people, enough equipment, enough anything." Jinho looked through the bars at the main chamber, where Nari hung limp in her restraints. Her natural glow was so dim now that she looked more like a ghost than a living being. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but if we don't try, she's dead anyway." They all are. The next few hours would determine whether they lived as free beings or died as prisoners. Either way, Jinho knew he couldn't live with himself if he didn't at least try to save them. The shift change happened at exactly 18 saos every day. Jinho had been counting on this routine for weeks, and now their lives depended on it. As the day guards headed to their quarters and the night shift took over, there would be exactly 4 minutes when the central hub was less heavily monitored. Jinho clutched his improvised device in his hands. It looked like a mess of wires and circuit boards held together with tape and hope, but it was all they had. Do-hyun crouched beside him in their cell, watching the corridor for the signal. In the main chamber, Nari was barely hanging on. The energy extraction machine had been running at maximum power all day, draining what little life she had left. But somehow, she managed to give Jinho a small nod when their eyes met. She was ready. "Now," whispered Minji from her position near the power conduits. The older Lumina had volunteered for the most dangerous part of the plan. She would create a distraction by overloading her own energy extraction machine, hopefully drawing guards away from the central hub. The plan started going wrong immediately. Minji tried to surge her natural energy into the machine connected to her, but she was too weak. Instead of overloading the system, she just caused a small power fluctuation that made a few lights flicker. The guards barely noticed. "We need a bigger distraction," Do-hyun said urgently as they watched guards still standing at their posts around the central hub. That's when Sung, the old Lumina scientist, made a decision that changed everything. Despite being connected to an energy extraction machine himself, he began to speak in the Lumina language, his voice carrying across the chamber to every member of his species. Jinho couldn't understand the words, but he could feel their power. Sung was calling to his people, reminding them of their homeworld, their families, their freedom. One by one, the other Lumina began to respond. Their natural glow, which had been dim for so long, started to brighten. Even while connected to the draining machines, they were finding strength in their shared connection. The energy extraction systems began to overload as more power flowed through them than they were designed to handle. Alarms started blaring throughout the facility. "What's happening?" shouted one of the Vorthak guards as his monitoring equipment went crazy with warning signals. "The Lumina are resisting somehow," another guard replied, frantically trying to adjust the extraction machines. "Their energy output is spiking beyond safe levels." In the chaos, 3 guards ran toward the main power controls, leaving the central hub momentarily undefended. This was Jinho's chance. He sprinted from his hiding spot, carrying his device toward the central distribution system. The hub was a massive cylindrical machine covered in blinking lights and control panels. Jinho had studied it for weeks, but he still had to guess where to connect his improvised reversal device. "Human prisoner escaping," shouted a Vorthak guard who spotted Jinho running across the chamber. Gunfire erupted around him, energy blasts, scorching the metal floor. But the Lumina prisoners weren't finished helping. Even while connected to their machines, they continued to surge their energy, causing more systems to overload and creating enough chaos to give Jinho cover. He reached the central hub and frantically connected his device to what he hoped were the right power conduits. His hands were shaking as he activated the reversal sequence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then everything happened at once. The central hub began to vibrate violently as decades of stored Lumina energy suddenly reversed direction. Instead of flowing out to power the Vorthak facility, all that accumulated life force rushed back toward its original sources. The Lumina prisoners, who had been weak and dying just moments before, suddenly blazed with renewed power. Their natural luminescence flared so brightly that the guards had to shield their eyes. The energy extraction machines, designed only to drain power, began to spark and smoke as massive amounts of energy flowed backward through their circuits. Nari's eyes snapped open as life force flooded back into her body. For the first time in months, she felt strong. Around the chamber, other Lumina were breaking free from their restraints as the overloaded machines released them. "Impossible!" Overseer Keth screamed as he watched his carefully controlled prison system collapse around him. "Shut down the central hub. Cut all power connections." But it was too late. The reversal process had reached critical mass. Energy extraction machines throughout the facility were exploding in showers of sparks. The Vorthak's weapons and equipment, all powered by the central grid, began failing one by one. The Lumina, now free and energized, joined the fight. Their natural ability to generate and control electrical energy became a weapon against their former captors. Bolts of bioelectricity arced from their hands, disabling Vorthak weapons and stunning the guards. Jinho watched in amazement as Nari, who had been near death just minutes earlier, now stood tall and powerful, electricity dancing around her fingers like controlled lightning. "Thank you," she said to him in clear English, her voice strong again. "Now we finish this." The prison had become a battlefield, and for the first time since their capture, the prisoners were winning. The battle in the main chamber was turning in favor of the prisoners when everything changed. A deep, booming voice echoed through the entire facility, speaking in the harsh Vorthak language. Jinho didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was an order, and it sounded final. "What's he saying?" Jinho shouted to Nari, over the noise of sparking machines and fighting guards. Nari's face went pale, her renewed energy flickering with fear. "Commander Vogel, he says if he cannot have us as slaves, then no one gets to live." A new alarm began blaring, different from the power overload warnings. This one was deeper, more urgent, and it made Jinho's stomach drop. He had heard similar alarms during his engineering training. It was a self-destruct sequence. Throughout the facility, emergency lights began flashing red. Automated systems started sealing blast doors and evacuating atmosphere from non-essential sections. The Vorthak had built this place with a final option in mind, and Commander Vorgul was using it. "Everyone out," Do-hyun yelled as he helped free the last few Lumina from their broken energy extraction machines. This whole place is going to blow. But getting out wasn't going to be simple. The facility was deep underground with only one main tunnel leading to the surface. Worse, the self-destruct sequence was designed to collapse that tunnel first, trapping everyone inside before the main explosion started. The first detonation came from somewhere far above them. The ceiling shook, and dust rained down as support beams groaned under the pressure. Some of the weaker Lumina, who had used up most of their restored energy in the fight, were already collapsing from exhaustion. "The tunnel's collapsing," Minji called out in her own language, then switched to broken English. "Way out is blocked." Jinho looked around desperately. There had to be another way to the surface. He remembered seeing ventilation shafts and emergency passages during his work details, but most of them were too small for people to crawl through. Then Sung, the old Lumina scientist, grabbed Jinho's arm. "Mining tunnels," he gasped, still weak, from his time connected to the machines. "Vorthak dig deep for rare metals. Some tunnels go up toward surface." "Where?" Jinho asked urgently, as another explosion shook the facility. This one was closer, and chunks of ceiling started falling around them. Sung pointed toward a section of the chamber that was half collapsed already. Behind the power core, but dangerous, might not be stable. It was their only chance. Jinho helped, organized the evacuation, with the stronger Lumina supporting the weaker ones. But as they made their way toward the mining tunnels, Nari suddenly stumbled and fell. The effort of channeling so much energy during their escape had cost her more than she'd realized. Her body had been drained for so long that the sudden surge of power had overwhelmed her system. She was conscious, but couldn't walk on her own. "Go," she whispered to Jinho. "Save the others. I'm too weak." "Not a chance," Jinho replied, lifting her onto his back. She was lighter than he expected, her body still recovering from months of energy extraction. "We all get out together, or nobody does." The mining tunnel was a narrow shaft carved roughly into the rock. It angled upward at a steep slope, and the walls were supported by metal beams that groaned ominously with each explosion from below. Jinho found himself near the back of the group, carrying Nari while trying to keep up with the others. "Jinho," Nari said weakly, her arms wrapped around his shoulders. "If tunnel collapses, leave me and run." "Stop talking like that," he panted, sweat dripping down his face as he climbed the steep passage. "We're going to make it." But the explosions were getting closer and more frequent. Commander Vogel's self-destruct sequence was working exactly as designed, collapsing the facility from the bottom up. Behind them, Jinho could hear the roar of falling rock and twisted metal as entire sections of the underground complex caved in. The group ahead of them had stopped moving. Do-hyun's voice echoed back down the tunnel. "There's a cave-in ahead. The passage is blocked." Jinho's heart sank. They were trapped between the collapsing facility below and a blocked tunnel above. Some of the Lumina were using their energy abilities to try to clear the fallen rocks, but they were still too weak to move the larger boulders. That's when they heard it. A different kind of rumbling. Coming from above instead of below, it sounded like machinery, heavy equipment moving on the surface. "Ships," Sung said, recognizing the sound. "Someone's landing up there." "Vorthak reinforcements?" Minji asked fearfully. "Or rescue?" Jinho hoped desperately. Another massive explosion rocked the facility, this one so close that the tunnel walls cracked around them. Jinho tightened his grip on Nari and kept climbing toward the blocked passage ahead. They had come. Too far to give up now. Even if the tunnel was blocked, even if more explosions were coming, even if they only had minutes left, Jinho was determined to see daylight again. And he was going to make sure Nari saw it too. The sound of the ships above grew louder, and Jinho allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, help had finally arrived. The sound of drilling came from directly above them. Someone was cutting through the collapsed rock with heavy equipment, and bright lights were starting to shine through the cracks. Jinho held Nari tighter as debris rained down around them. "Stand back," a voice shouted in English from above. "We're coming through." The ceiling of the tunnel exploded inward as a massive drill broke through. Behind it came rescue workers in environmental suits, carrying emergency medical equipment and breathing apparatus. The first person through the hole was a human woman, with captain's insignia on her uniform. "This is Captain Park of the Earth Defense Force," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to command. "We received a distress signal from this location. How many survivors?" 43, Doyen called out, helping count the freed prisoners. "Mix of humans and Lumina, some are in critical condition." Jinho carefully handed Nari to one of the medics, but she grabbed his arm before they could separate them. "The evidence," she whispered urgently. "You must show them what Vorthak did to my people." She was right. Rescuing the prisoners was only the first step. If they didn't expose the Vorthak's crimes, this could happen again somewhere else. "Captain," Jinho called out as they were being evacuated to the surface, "I have recordings of the entire operation down there. The Vorthak have been enslaving and killing an entire species. The galaxy needs to know about this." Captain Park paused in her evacuation coordination. "What kind of recordings?" "Everything. The energy extraction machines, the torture, the systematic murder of innocent beings. I managed to download files from their computers during the escape." The truth was, Jinho had been thinking like an engineer throughout their imprisonment. While building his reversal device, he had also jury-rigged a data collection unit that recorded everything his device interfaced with. The Vorthak's own computers had documented their crimes in detail, never expecting anyone would be able to access the files. Once they reached the surface, Jinho found himself surrounded by ships from multiple species. The Earth Defense Force was there, but so were vessels from the Galactic Council, independent news organizations, and even some ships he didn't recognize. "How did you find us?" he asked Captain Park as medics worked on Nari nearby. "Your communication relay," she explained. "The one you were originally sent to repair. When you didn't report back, we investigated and found it had been modified to broadcast a repeating signal. Took us 3 days to trace it back to this location." Jinho smiled, despite his exhaustion. Even in capture, his engineering instincts had saved them. The signal modifications he'd made during his original mission had served as an unintentional distress beacon. The evidence Jinho had collected proved to be even more damning than anyone expected. The Vorthak files showed that their operation wasn't limited to this one facility. They had similar sites on 12 different planets, enslaving thousands of Lumina and several other energy-producing species. Within hours of the rescue, the recordings were being broadcast across every major communication network in the galaxy. The images of Lumina chained to energy extraction machines sparked outrage from dozens of civilizations. The Galactic Council moved faster than anyone had ever seen them act before. Emergency sessions were called, fleets were mobilized, and arrest warrants were issued for every Vorthak involved in the slave trade. Commander Vogel, who had survived the facility's destruction by escaping in a personal shuttle, was captured trying to reach Vorthak space. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his own computer files contained detailed records of every crime he had ordered. Nari recovered quickly once she received proper medical treatment. The natural resilience of her people, combined with advanced galactic medicine, restored her strength within days. When the time came for the War Crimes Tribunal, she stood as the primary witness against her captors. "They took everything from us," she testified, her voice clear and strong in the packed courtroom. "Our families, our homes, our very life force. But they could not take our hope, and they could not break our spirit." The tribunal's verdict was unanimous. The Vorthak syndicate was completely disbanded, their assets seized to compensate their victims. The surviving members faced life imprisonment for crimes against sentient beings. More importantly, the exposed facilities were shut down and their prisoners freed. Thousands of beings from multiple species were returned to their homeworlds, many of them reunited with families they thought they'd never see again. Jinho found himself something of a hero across the galaxy, but he always insisted that the real heroes were the prisoners who never gave up hope. The Lumina especially honored him as a friend of their people, and Nari made sure he knew he would always be welcome on their homeworld. "You saved us," she told him at the final ceremony honoring the survivors. "We saved each other," Jinho replied. "That's what people do." The galaxy was a little bit safer and a little bit more just because one engineer couldn't ignore the sound of suffering.